Warning: this episode contains brain food that will lead to improved emotional and social intelligence. Give us 1 hour and we'll help you change the way you think about happiness. Harvesting Happiness with Lisa Cypers Kamen is fresh, optimistic, and purpose-driven media that promotes well-being from the inside out. Each week, Lisa spotlights diverse trendsetters and change agents who are the greatest contemporary thinkers and doers, devoting their lives to creating a better world in which to live. Your host, Lisa Cypers Kamen, is a widely recognized applied positive psychology expert, author, documentary filmmaker, and lecturer specializing in optimal lifestyle management. Let's get to it. Here's Lisa.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are. Thanks for joining me on today's show, where you will learn how to defend against disinformation through responsible thinking and pragmatic perspectives. My first guest is Dr. John Cook, and this episode originally aired in June of 2021. Cranky Uncle is the creation of scientist and cartoonist John Cook, who uses cartoons, humor, and critical thinking to expose the misleading techniques of science denial and build public resilience against misinformation. John Cook is a postdoctoral research fellow at the Climate Change Communication Research Hub at Monash University. He obtained his PhD at the University of Western Australia, studying the cognitive psychology of climate science denial. His research focuses on understanding and countering misinformation about climate change, and I think just misinformation too, John, if I'm correct.
Yes, because my work has increasingly focused on critical thinking, it's really started to be applicable to every type of misinformation across all topics. So
let's talk about everybody's cranky uncle, cranky parent, cranky sibling, the crank that is going along right now around the world. What impact does misinformation have on society?
Well, misinformation and science denial, unfortunately, has a lot of really negative impacts. I've been studying it in climate change for the last decade, and in that we see that misinformation and denial breed distrust of scientists. It obviously can cause people to believe wrong things or just stop them believing accurate things. And it can reduce people's support for climate action, which is something that we really desperately need these days. But then it also has these other downstream effects, and we've seen that over the last year. When you breed an environment of distrusting scientists, then when you have issues like the COVID-19 pandemic, it becomes much easier for people to distrust medical scientific experts. And then that can cause people to behave in dangerous ways, like not wearing masks, not social distancing, ignoring expert advice. And then that endangers the health of the whole community.
Well, the health of the world. You know, we have so many people who refuse to be vaccinated because A, they don't believe in it, or B, there's fear and misinformation about what the vaccine does and how it works and how it was created.
Yes, I mean, the misinformation about COVID-19 has been pretty much nonstop from the beginning of the pandemic, and it's taken on many flavors. At the beginning, there was downplaying of the virus. That became harder and harder as we saw the death toll rising and rising. But then as the vaccinations started to become available, then we saw misinformation targeting vaccinations and having an impact on people wanting to get vaccinated. And that's what we need in order to get herd immunity and stop the virus from spreading. So whether it's downplaying the virus or downplaying the solutions to the virus, all of these things have health implications, and those are real world consequences.
But the issue is even deeper than that, isn't it? I mean, the symptom is maybe the reluctance to embrace the science or the unwillingness to get a vaccine. But the issue really is about the information out there making people feel fearful and feel as though they are somehow going to lose their freedom or their liberties if they do this thing, whatever it is, whether it's the vaccine or vote a certain way in an election.
Yeah, you really put your finger on it. Often science denial isn't really about the science at all. It's actually about other belief systems or even just people's identities. And it can vary across topics. With climate change, the biggest driver of rejecting the science is political ideology. People, as you say, people who don't like some of the solutions to climate change, rejecting that there's a problem in the first place that needs solving. But in other issues, such as evolution science, the ideology there is religious ideology. People don't like people feel like their belief systems are threatened by the scientific evidence, so they reject the science.
And this brings us to very dangerous territory, right? Because it is the absence of common sense, at least in my view. I'm willing to say this.
Well, I guess this is a very dad thing to say, but common sense isn't that common these days. But yeah, I mean, we should all be working from the same set of facts, and we might propose different solutions to that. But if we're not inhabiting the same reality, then it's becomes close to impossible to work together to come up with compromise solutions. And so trying to get everyone on at least the same page in terms of accepting evidence and a shared sense of reality, it's kind of essential to solving society's problems.
And the answer, or one possible way to engage in finding the answer and to inoculate ourselves from the infodemic, is through creative play, right? Because being playful gets us to talk, gets us to communicate. And I think this is why Cranky Uncle has put such a smile on my face. And I'd love for you to tell our listeners about why you developed Cranky Uncle and then how it's been received in the world.
So Cranky Uncle began with my psychological research into countering misinformation. And the principle is fairly straightforward and simple. It's basically when you explain the techniques used to mislead, that inoculates people. People don't like being misled. And it works across the political spectrum because whether you're conservative or liberal, nobody likes being misled. It's like explaining the sleight of hand that a magician uses, and then you can see through the trick. And so I set about trying to come up with engaging ways to explain misleading techniques of misinformation, and happened upon games as a really powerful way of doing it. Firstly, because as you say, it's engaging, it's fun, we use a lot of humor and cartoons in the game. But secondly, games have a particular, set of tools that are really useful in terms of misinformation and critical thinking, because critical thinking is hard. Our brains aren't really hardwired to stop and reason through arguments. But what games let you do is practice critical thinking. And the game just has you practicing spotting misinformation over and over again. And because you accumulate points, you level up, you want to get further and further into the game, that encourages you to practice and practice more. And the more you practice critical thinking, the quicker and better you get at it.
So who can play this game? Is it catered towards youth? Is it catered towards everyone above a certain age? I mean, when you think about critical thinking and when it kicks in the average human brain, if we were to rely upon that, we'd be looking at a population in their mid to late 20s.
Yeah, that's a good question, and I don't have a solid answer to that yet. We're actually collecting data to try to find the answer to that, because originally I designed the game thinking it would probably be college students playing it, and we released the game on iPhone and Android and on browsers to make it as free and accessible to everyone as possible. And certainly a lot of it's being played in a lot of college classes. But what surprised me was a lot of high school teachers signed up to start using the game in their classes, and even middle school teachers. So right now the game is being played in middle school, high school, and college, and we're collecting the data just to see how the different grade levels go. My gut instinct is that it will certainly be effective at a high school level. That's what I'm hearing anecdotally from teachers and students, and possibly middle school. And even if it isn't, then what we'll probably do is create a younger version of the game with simpler examples and simpler language, which would make it more accessible to middle school students.
But, I think the seeds get planted. Even if a child of 12 or 13 or 10 even younger, may not grasp the full spectrum of being able to critically think or solve problems, I think by playing the game, right, you plant the seeds.
Yeah, I think that that introducing students to critical thinking at middle school would be really powerful.
Yeah.
Education needs to be more than just dumping facts into kids' brains. We need to also be teaching them how to think. And part of critical thinking is being able to spot false arguments and logical fallacies, not just in misinformation and out in the world, but in our own arguments as well. I think that, I'm more attuned to using false dichotomies and other different fallacies from the Cranky Uncle game in my own arguments now. Or certainly my wife likes to point out when I use fallacies in my argument.
And a good argument is a good thing, right? There's nothing wrong with a good argument when one is able to engage in the discourse, backed by facts, backed by solid information that helps one critically think. But you can't just say, oh, it's fake, the fake news, it's bad science. No, facts are facts.
Yeah, I mean, a good argument is certainly important, but not just in terms of having a discussion with someone, but even how we make decisions in our lives. We want to make sound decisions based on good logic, and so by learning how to argue, it's not just about having an argument with someone. It's really about thinking logically and having sound arguments for our decision making, and that can permeate all of our life.
We're going to take a little break, and when we come back, we will carry on the conversation with John Cook. We're talking about Cranky Uncle, which is a game that he created and has illustrated as a cartoonist 10 years prior to becoming a scientist, right? This is the sort of integration of all things that you love, isn't it, John?
Yeah, I spent 10 years doing scientific research on how to respond to misinformation.
To learn more about Cranky Uncle, please visit crankyuncle.com. And you can also learn about John's work at skepticalscience.com. You can find him on Twitter at John F.O. Cook. And on Facebook, it's Cranky Uncles and Skeptical Science. We're going to take a brief pause and we'll return to the conversation with John Cook. Hang on just a sec. Before we pause, I want to remind you about the preciousness of time and the power of lifelong learning. I'm a busy gal who loves to read, and if you're anything like me, you've got a long book wish list and not enough hours in your day. And that's why I love Audible. Audible offers a huge library of book selections across most genres that includes bestsellers and new releases from fiction to nonfiction, such as memoirs, mysteries, thrillers, business, self-help, and more. You'll discover Audible Originals offering exclusive audio content from celebrities, renowned experts, and exciting new voices. Audible membership includes one title a month delivered digitally for your listening pleasure on the go and from wherever you are. Audible members get unlimited access to an expanding collection of audiobooks, Audible originals, and podcasts with new content being added each month. I'm in my car a lot, and right now I'm listening to River of the Gods, Genius, Courage, and Betrayal in the Search for the Source of the Nile by Candice Millard. Let Audible help you discover new ways to laugh, be inspired, or be entertained. New members can try it free for 30 days. Visit audible.com/HH or text HH to 500-500. That's audible.com/HH or text HH to 500-500 to try Audible free for 30 days. Audible.com/HH. Now let's take that pause. We'll be right back.
To learn more about cultivating sustainable well-being at home and the office, visit harvestinghappiness.com and explore Lisa's experiential on-site brain fitness workshops, corporate programming, and speaking engagement services.
And we're back, continuing the conversation with John Cook that originally aired in June of 2021. We're talking about defense against disinformation, responsible thinking, and pragmatic perspectives. Let's get back to it. John, I would love for you to just spend a minute talking about the cartooning and your skill set as a cartoonist, as an artist that came prior to becoming a scientist.
Yeah, so for a decade before I started my PhD, I was a cartoonist and put that aside and started my PhD studying science denial and trying to answer the question, how do you counter misinformation? And after about a decade of research, I learnt about using techniques to explain logical fallacies in misinformation and realized that cartoons were a perfect delivery mechanism for visualizing the logical flaws in misinformation. It was kind of my Dorothy from the Wizard of Oz moment, realizing that I had the answer with me all along. And so I started using cartoons, drawing cartoons to analogize or visualize the different logical flaws in misinformation.
So have you attacked the one about a former presidential candidate who was involved with a Pizzagate scandal and pedophiles? Have you done that one in cartoon?
I haven't looked at Pizzagate specifically. I guess that's more political misinformation, and I've been focusing more on science misinformation. But I certainly have been touching on conspiracy theories, which again, conspiracy theories abound across all issues. There are climate change conspiracy theories, COVID-19 conspiracy theories, and political conspiracy theories. And when a person believes one of them, they tend to believe a cluster of different conspiracies.
So give us a couple of examples of topics that you tackle with Cranky Uncle, and we'll go through the thought experiment with you.
So a common, an annoyingly common argument with climate misinformation is the argument that it's cold, therefore global warming isn't real. And so we see it every winter. As soon as it gets cold, you'll inevitably hear your cranky uncle say, what happened to that global warming, eh? And you think, yes, uncle. But the logic there, if I can take that logic and transplant it into a parallel situation, it's exactly the same as arguing at nighttime, it's dark, the sun isn't real. It's not looking at the big picture. It's only looking at your immediate experience. And so that's one of the examples I use in the Cranky Uncle game is I'll show a cartoon of Cranky Uncle arguing it's cold, global warming isn't real, and then switch it to a cartoon of Cranky Uncle at nighttime arguing it's dark, the sun isn't real. It's a way to use these cartoon analogies to illustrate logical fallacies.
And when we debunk fuzzy logic, I think there's a little bit of shame, right? For the person who has believed these fallacies and then they are proven wrong. What happens?
Yeah, that's a really tricky one because I guess there you're talking about having conversations with your cranky uncle what the Cranky Uncle game does is it inoculates players. It educates them on the misleading techniques in misinformation so that they're less likely to be misled. But what the game doesn't do yet is help you to have difficult conversations with your cranky uncle about these kind of contentious issues. And that's a whole other skill set. There are a whole range of techniques, like conversational techniques, that you can use to have these difficult conversations, using empathy, having conversations with curiosity, and encouraging people to, explain how and why they believe what they believe. Unfortunately, Cranky Uncle doesn't do that yet, but I'm hoping down the track to be able to add a new character to the game. After you've finished with Cranky Uncle, then it unlocks a cordial cousin who will explain how to have these productive but difficult conversations.
I love that. The cordial, as we would say here in the U.S., cousin.
Cordial.
Cordial. And I was thinking, Emily the empath, that she's got to ask powerful, open-ended questions, right?
Empathetic Emily, that might be even better than cordial cousin. It's a working title at this point. We'll have to play around with different options.
Like, tell me more. I mean, I think, and that's something that we can always ask, right? We can always find a way to ask a question that sort of desensitizes or takes the sting out of the issue. When somebody, I know for me, in the case of my cranky family members, when I say, tell me more about that, I'm really curious. What does that mean? And then they will, tell me more of their story or what they believe to be the story. And it does offer a little window. Doesn't always work, but it does offer a window.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to think about it. It doesn't always work, but at least it gives you a fighting chance. I've had lots of conversations with my own father, who was, I guess, a cranky dad, and he didn't. He wasn't convinced that climate change was real, but over time, just not through a particularly super smart argument or anything, but just having lots of conversations over time, gradually he changed his mind and became more accepting of climate science. But on the other hand, I've also had similar conversations with my father-in-law and never got anywhere. So there's no foolproof trick. I think you just need to be present, be willing to listen to people, be willing to patiently talk to them over time. And sometimes you'll make headway, but other times you won't.
And the climate deniers are a particularly difficult bunch, right? Because they might be very well educated, or they might be well read. They might fully understand cause and effect, but they're completely blind in this area.
Often they have a lot of information at their fingertips, but the information is all there just to support the various climate myths that they like to argue. And all those climate myths have fallacies at their roots. We published an analysis in Environmental Research Letters a couple of years ago now, 2018, and we basically used critical thinking to deconstruct around 50 of the most common arguments from climate deniers, and they all had logical fallacies in them. And when people are motivated to believe something, then they'll just grab any information that will support their belief system. And that happens not just with people who aren't educated, but also with people who are educated, who have more tools to be able to justify their motivated beliefs. So, we do see climate deniers can throw a whole range of different arguments at you. And that's really what the Cranky Uncle game is about. It's about equipping you to be able to see those different fallacies in the range of different arguments you might encounter.
We're almost out of time, but I want to ask you about the power and value of role-playing in this process. When we're trying to really activate
greater critical thinking, when we're trying to inoculate ourselves from the infodemic. We can also play the game, put yourself in someone else's shoes kind of thing, and challenge ourselves a bit.
Yes. So the game and also activities like role-playing are really an active form of inoculation. You can be inoculated by receiving explanations of denial techniques, but you can also become inoculated by actively, as you say, putting your mind in, like putting yourself in the position of the science denier. And games are one way of doing that by trying to become the cranky uncle. But also we've done a lot of role-playing exercises in classrooms where you have a simulated conversation where one person is the cranky uncle and the other person is trying to convince them of, say, climate change. And just trying to play that role of cranky uncle and trying to marshal the different arguments encountered in the game is a way of reinforcing what you've just learned about those different techniques and more deeply inoculating yourself. And it's also fun. Like, we've had a lot of fun doing role-playing in classrooms. Usually the way we do it is I'll first do a demonstration with the professor who's teaching the class where I'll be the cranky uncle and they're trying to convince me. And unfortunately, I get very competitive. so then I get crankier and crankier in the role-playing conversation, trying to bamboozle the professor with all the different fallacies. But I think students seem to like that. It's quite fun and entertaining.
Well, I hope our listeners are as delighted by Cranky Uncle as I am, and will seek it out and use it as a tool in their own conversations and their own positive arguments, because like we said earlier, that a good argument is actually a good thing. To learn more about the work of John Cook, please visit crankyuncle.com and skepticalscience.com. On Twitter, you can find John at John F.O. Cook. And on Facebook, those pages are Cranky Uncles and Skeptical Science. John, come back and share more about Cordial Cousin or Empathic Emily whenever. We'll be right back, and that's the truth.
Did you know that happiness is actually good for your health? Happy people live longer, are more productive, and make better partners, parents, and professionals. Connect with us on Facebook at Harvesting Happiness and follow Lisa on Twitter at Lisa Kamen for a daily dose of inspiration.
And we're back, continuing the conversation about how to defend against disinformation using responsible thinking and pragmatic perspectives. My next guest is Dr. Simon Critchley, and this conversation originally aired in November of 2021. Simon Critchley is the Hans Jonas Professor of Philosophy at the New School for Social Research and the moderator of the New York Times Stone column. He is the author or editor of many books, including the recent book Tragedy, the Greeks, and Us, a novella, Memory Theater, a book-length essay, Notes on Suicide, and Studies of David Bowie and Association Football. The book we're talking about today is Bald, 35 Philosophical Shortcuts. Simon, thanks for joining me on the show today.
Thank you very much, Lisa. Nice to be here.
Well, I shared with you prior to starting that I was walking through the airport the other day and I saw your book and I had made a note to self to reach out to Andrea to say, go get this guy. And I was so delighted that this guy is here. So
yeah, I am. Yeah, it's very nice to be here. I'm amazed that you saw the book in an airport. That makes me very happy.
Yeah, most definitely. And we are in dire need of some good contemporary philosophy these days to make sense out of the chaos of the last several years. What is philosophy anyway, and why do we need it?
Oh, I think philosophy is one way of defining it is that there's no agreement about the nature of philosophy and no agreement about any of the key issues that we talk about. So philosophy is just defined by questions about what it is. And in a sense, philosophers have been asking the question, what is philosophy, for 3,000 years in different places. And there are different ways of answering it. Love of wisdom is the most obvious way, because that's what the word means in Greek. Philosophia is love of wisdom. So, and there's a lot packed into that, actually, but that's the easiest way of defining it. Love of wisdom.
Yeah, love of wisdom, or pondering the nature of human existence, maybe?
Yeah, it can be that too. It can be, really, it's the question. Philosophers deal with the questions that don't really, that nag at us, and which we can't really resolve. And philosophy is also, this is something I say, in the book. The first piece I did for the Stone was called "What is a Philosopher?" rather than "What is philosophy?" What is a philosopher? And because Socrates tells different stories, so philosophy is also about storytelling. And one story he tells is about the philosopher Thales, who fell into a ditch. And he fell into a ditch, and a serving girl was described as laughing at him. So philosophy begins with somebody falling into a ditch and someone laughing at that person who's fallen into a ditch. So it begins in kind of comedy. It begins, so the philosopher in an important way is a kind of a fool, right? Rather than being an expert. Philosophers are not experts. That'd be one way of describing it. So if you listen to, the radio or read newspapers or whatever, or watch TV, then it's full of experts. We're, in a sense, lifelong amateurs who are driven by a kind of interest in things which we spend years trying to ponder and figure out. And it also means being a little bit like a fool and a bit like a child, actually, in terms of asking irritating, nagging questions. It's also why kids are very good philosophers, natural philosophers, like they're natural drawers, they'll draw these amazing things when they're 4 or 5 years old. And when they're maybe a tiny bit older than that, they'll start asking really deep, searching questions. For example, when they realize at some point that their parents are going to die. This often happens with parents. And then the kid has to figure out, well, what does that mean? And in a sense, being a philosopher is seeing things with an almost childlike naivety and curiosity, and not believing that there's some specialist or expert that's going to be able to answer it. It's there are open questions, and there are more open questions than one can begin to ponder in a lifetime.
I have a question for you.
Yes.
And that is your story of the Liverpool Football Club.
Oh, yeah.
Because I think that will give our listeners a glimpse into what we're talking about.
Oh, right. Well, yes, I'm happy to do that. And actually, if you could see me on video, I'm wearing a Liverpool Football Club top. My family are from Liverpool. Everybody, my family is from Liverpool. My grandmother supported the team, Liverpool Football Club. And on her grave, our gravestone, I only realized this was odd about 10 years ago. I photographed my grandmother's grave to send to a friend, and they said, "Is that a Liverpool club crest on her grave?" She said, "Of course it is. I mean, who do you think she supported?" And my father used to train at Anfield in Liverpool. He was a pretty good soccer player, and then an injury, and then lost his job, and then ended up coming down south. And I, from the age of, 2-3 years old, I was supporting Liverpool. And so it's and I have a son who's 28, who is a passionate, lifelong supporter of Liverpool because he had no choice. I forced him into supporting Liverpool. And so that, if you think about that's 100 odd years of, it's actually more than 100 years, 120 years of just in one
joy
little
and
family.
pain.
Yeah, of supporting one team. So it's deep. And it's linked to place and and tribe and identity, and in the case of Liverpool is a city. I mean, like New York in some ways, maybe like Boston or Baltimore in other ways, where the center of gravity is really around, say, working class culture, ordinary people, and it's about, and also it's about Liverpool people are meant to be funny and be able to sing a song. That's always a good thing. And that's why we got the Beatles and why they were funny, I suppose. Yeah. But there's lots. So it's very important to, and it's also maybe the most important thing is that the Liverpool is a football team. It's a place which is in a country, but not of a country. So, you could say I'm English, but I feel like my family is from Liverpool, and Liverpool just happens to be in England, but it's not particularly English. So my relationship to England and the ruling class and Boris Johnson and the Etonians and the House of Windsor is at very best kind of ambiguous, if not hostile. So there are different ways of being from the country I'm from.
So when we speak of philosophy, in addition to trying to answer some of the big questions, do you think it's also a way for us to come to understand ourselves in relationship to the world and others?
Yes. Yeah, I think philosophy gives you, at its best. This is harvesting happiness. The end of philosophy for many of the ancient philosophers was happiness. What they meant by that, is perhaps less familiar. That happiness, the word in Greek is eudaimonia, which means more like blessedness, or actually the word in Greek means well-goddedness, to be well with God in whatever God might be, whoever God might be. So the goal of philosophy is happiness, and happiness is an experience of contemplation, and contemplation of the nature of that which is, the nature of the substances of things. So philosophy promises at its most extreme a kind of godly bliss. And whether we think that's what we mean by happiness, I think is a good point. One more thing I wanted to say, because it's another point which takes us back to our friends, the Greeks, and it's a really important point for me anyway, is that the Sophocles, the dramatist, in one of his plays has this line, "Call no man happy until he is dead." Call no man happy until he is dead. And this seems like an odd thing to say, but what he meant by that was that one's happiness is not something that you can ever judge. Happiness is something which someone else judges about you. So, and for the ancient Greeks, that meant that happiness consisted in the stories that were told about you after you'd popped off, right? And that's what the Greeks call glory. It's a lovely idea that your glory will consist in the stories that are told about you after you've gone. And so in that sense, happiness is not for the Greeks and in philosophy just a personal concern about how I feel. It's about, in a sense, how you're seen, how you act in the world, how other people see you, and what kind of legacy you might leave behind. And so so philosophy at its best can promise a kind of godlike happiness, and that sounds pretty good, doesn't it?
Oh, it does. I like the word you use, well-goddedness, for eudaimonia. Yeah. But the Western world is in pursuit of hedonic happiness, which is not sustainable, not even real happiness.
No, it's philosophy is. There's a kind of thing that I do. I get paid to think for a living. I'm an academic, and there's a whole kind of career structure and all of that stuff, which is, I don't know how interesting that is even to me these days. But if you go further back and think about what philosophers have been historically, it's much closer to the life of a recluse or a monk or a contemplative, or certainly someone who has moved away from material possessions and from things like wealth. It requires a kind of asceticism, a kind of ascesis of the self, which is the kind of behavior we associate more with religious people. But philosophy has a strong element of that too. And there are examples of, like philosophers like Wittgenstein, who was from an assimilated and very wealthy Jewish family in Vienna, who once he got his family money, just gave it all away to different people and tried to live as poorly as possible. And there is a kind of a sense in which, if you are pursuing wealth and you're concerned with, day-to-day pleasures, I mean, that can certainly fill up one's time. Whether it actually is fulfilling in terms of an overall existence, I think is a moot point. And one thing that I hope that the pandemic has done over the past year is it's allowed people to raise certain fundamental questions about what they think is of value in their lives, and to reassess that. So it's been a moment where we've been in an enforced period of contemplation, reflection, and anxiety and fear too, but also reflection. So it's been a philosophical moment, and I hope that sticks around for a bit longer.
Me too. Let's take a break, and then we'll come back and continue the conversation with Simon Critchley. To learn more about his work, please visit simoncritchley.org. On Twitter, you can find him at Critchley Update, and on Facebook, Simon Critchley's Pages of Dead Philosophers. We're going to grab a quick break, and we'll be right back.
Who says money can't buy happiness? Whether you are a skeptic or seeker, check out Lisa's new book. Are we happy yet? 8 Keys to Unlocking a Joyful Life, a boot camp manual for greater emotional fitness, is available at Barnes & Noble, Amazon, IndieBound, and HarvestingHappiness.com. Here's a truth bomb. Emotions are contagious, and happiness is a universally desired state. But we tend to forget that we all have the freedom to be happy or the liberty to be miserable each day, regardless of external circumstances. Explore the journey of human happiness, how to find it and keep it, with Lisa's documentary film, H Factor. Where is your heart? Visit harvestinghappiness.com to learn more.
What is your happiness?
And we're back continuing the conversation with Simon Critchley that originally aired in November of 2021. We're talking about disinformation defense, how responsible thinking and pragmatic perspectives can help. Simon, before we broke, you spoke about the importance and value of our year of contemplation, imposed by the pandemic. And we began to talk about its value and in your hopes that this would continue. And I can say for myself and those around me that I too had a year of contemplative thinking and being, and see how important being in that state is to not just happiness, but creating a life of meaning. And I wanted to move forward, piggybacking on that, to talk a little bit about what's ailing our society and what's going right in our world right now. Sort of both sides of the coin.
I think that certainly for me, and when I was in my late teens and early 20s, I had a misspent youth, would be one way of putting it. And I remember feeling an absolutely chronic anxiety. I didn't really have the word anxiety to describe it. And somehow around that time, I also began to read some philosophical work. I read an essay, I remember, by Martin Heidegger, who's a philosopher that I've done work on over the years. And he had this sentence where he said, "Anxiety reveals the nothing." Anxiety reveals the nothing. And without being able to say what that meant, I understood exactly what it meant. Right? The anxiety that I was feeling, the sense of kind of vertigo, in a sense, vertigo, dizziness, was about nothing in particular. That there was no particular thing in the world I was scared of, but the whole thing had induced a kind of dread in me. And it's I think the pandemic has brought that back into much sharper focus, that people in a sense are scared of a virus. Okay. And that's something to be scared of. But I think more in a deeper level, what it's induced in a lot of people has been a general anxiety about their whole being in the world, who they are, and what matters to them. And that's stepping back from one's entanglement in, work and travel and running around and exhausting ourselves with a lot of activities which perhaps seemed important, and then suddenly they were ripped away last year, and we were left kind of stranded with ourselves or with our families for company, trying to figure things out. And I think that's a really important moment. It's not just it's not that it's an experience of depression or sadness or melancholy that needs to be medicated or solved, as it were. It should be used and worked with. So I guess what I think at my deepest level is that anxiety that we feel, that dread that we feel about and we felt over the last year, is what actually makes possible our freedom, our freedom as human beings, and what we can accord value to, and what we can really think is important, and what we can commit ourselves to. I think a lot of us have been forced to reassess that, and I think it's obviously there are a whole series of political things connected with this that I don't think I even want to get into. But we know what we've been through over the last year. It's been strange.
Show.
Yeah, it's been strange and rough. But the importance of just stepping back and reassessing and thinking things through, rather than being endlessly kind of swept away by the busyness of life, I think is that's philosophical activity. So I think that although people didn't choose it, they've become philosophers over the last year. What's that going to lead to? Well, I think it's going to lead to a real sense of the importance of deep bonds and deep relationships. I think certainly in my case, and I don't think I'm alone in this, that I've not seen a lot of people over the year, but I've seen some people over the year, and those people I've seen, of those friendships have deepened and become more profound over the year, and more trusting, and we've seen each other in these kind of very exposed, vulnerable states, and that's very important, because we're all weak, fragile creatures, and we can be wiped away with a virus. Human life is fragile, is vulnerable, and we're dependent on others.
Yeah.
But that's our strength. That's what makes human life worth living: dependence, vulnerability, weakness. It's not about individuality and strength and powering through. It's about accepting that you're a weak, dependent, reasonable, most of the time, animal who's scared a lot of the time, and that, I think, that puts us in some very good company historically. Actually, I think it's the way human beings have felt a lot of the time, because there's been a lot of plague a lot of the time in history. So I think we were living in a kind of counterfeit eternity, a counterfeit immortality a lot of the time prior to the pandemic, and the pandemic has maybe woken us up, and also to enjoy things like right now I'm in New York, and I live in Brooklyn, and I'm hearing birds singing, and I remember I've lived in this apartment for nearly 10 years, and it was only really last year that I really began to listen to birdsong and migratory birds going up the East Coast, and they're passing through again, and I'm listening to them, and there's something to be said for that. Just taking the time to appreciate a bird singing. It's singing its voice out early in the evening, and it's to focus on those small pleasures and take the time that they require, and not to rush all the time.
What I hear you saying is that as life became maybe perhaps more small or insulated during the pandemic, that it also became bigger and larger, and we began to maybe understand our place in it a bit more.
I think so. I mean, I think it did. I think it's. I think our scale shrunk to, there were people who were living alone or people who were living in small family groups or whatever. But at the same time, the sense of the world got bigger because everybody was in the same mess in different ways, doing different things, but in the same mess. And I think it also had, I think it did also have, political consequences in the sense in which we ended up with Joe Biden as president, and what Joe Biden is really good at is grieving. He's a griever in chief. I mean, whatever one thinks of Biden, and I think a lot of things about Biden, a lot of good things about Biden, but he is empathetic. He appreciates people's suffering, and I think that's something that we've all gone through in the last year. We're codependent on each other. We maybe, if we're lucky, I've had a vaccination. I have not been sick, but I'm also incredibly sensitive and touched by, the suffering that's still going on. And I have, say, students in Brazil, some really good students in Brazil who've been stuck there for since March last year, and it's not a great situation in Brazil. And
No.
And so you feel. I think it's so. So I think there's the solitude and the withdrawal have led to an increase in empathy, compassion, and a sense of, we need to do decent things where possible, because it is later than we think.
Yes, it's later than we think. Thank you for saying that,
No.
That's kind of powerful. And, maybe the chief humanist in charge,
Yes.
You're right. It's exactly what we needed.
I mean, what was intolerable over the last year was just the mismanagement of the situation here, and the ineptitude of the response. There are certain times when government and institutions serve very good purposes, right? For something like a virus, we need scientific institutions to do the research. We need pharmaceutical companies to make the vaccine. We need distribution networks. We need organization, and all of that should hopefully go on, behind our backs. It should just be the way in which a society functions. And it felt in the United States last year that had all every moment seemed to be, a crisis, some outrage on social media and whatever, and it's just exhausting. And I think the other thing, which is, whether this is interesting or not, is the feeling of fatigue, the feeling of tiredness that people have. And I teach students and on Zoom, which is not great. And I really see their fatigue, their exhaustion, and for someone like me as a teacher, Zoom is okay. You can kind of, get away with it, but they're really losing out on the whole experience of being a student, being in a room with people, having chats and conversations with new people and being excited by that, and then new friendships forming and intrigues and all those wonderful things that make human life interesting. And there they are on their, the little boxes, little stamps on their on the Zoom screen, and they're strangers to each other, and I'm strangers to them, and we're kind of maintaining the illusion this is fine, but it's really not. You need, so in a sense that two things have happened in the last year. On the one hand, we've realized the extraordinary power of, the digital age and the internet and blah blah blah, and that's made amazing things possible. On the other hand, we're now really, really very clearly aware of the limitations of that and the huge importance there is on actually being in a room or in a space with another human being and being able to read their cues, all that nonverbal stuff, which is really hard to do when you're pulled out on your own and and trying to look at a computer screen. And so, and the last thing I want to say about this, which I think is the thing that I guess worries me most, is that I did one of the things that I wrote about in previous years, and then I did some more work on this last year, was on suicide. It's not a pleasant topic, but it's an important topic. And when you look at the literature on suicide, like the proper scientific literature on suicide, it is clear that the suicide rates always increase in the spring. It's when things are getting better that people finally give up and lose heart. So in a sense, what we have to focus on right now is that the pandemic is, at least for us in the privileged United States, is beginning to pass. But the hangover of that in terms of the effects of the last year on how we feel about everything are going to be with us for a long time, and that should really be our focus. And a lot of people so as things get better, this is what I'm trying to say. As things get better objectively in relationship to, say, mortality rates and virus numbers, things are going to get maybe worse when it comes to mental health problems and issues and things like that. And we have to be very attentive to that in the next months and years, I think, particularly on the young.
I agree. And I want to urge our listeners to pick up a copy of Bald, 35 Philosophical Shortcuts, and also have a look at the last essay, number 35, Our Fear, Our Trembling, Our Strength, by my guest today, Simon Critchley. Thanks, Simon. This has been such a great conversation, and I really love your work and appreciate the angle from which you come.
Well, thank you very much, Lisa. It's been great fun.
Yeah, and really good fun. Come back anytime. Hang out with me.
Yeah, sure. Whenever you want.
All right.
I'm here.
We'll do it. To learn more, please visit simoncritchley.org, on Twitter at Critchley Update, and on Facebook, Simon Critchley's Page of Dead Philosophers. Thanks for joining us on Harvesting Happiness today. This is Lisa Cypers Kamen on behalf of my guests, John Cook and Simon Critchley, wishing you kind thoughts, kinder words, and the kindest of actions. Until next time, remember, happiness is an inside job. Happiness is your inside job. Please go out and rock your day, and remember to be kind to one another.
Keep harvesting your own happiness anytime and anywhere, from the comfort of wherever you are. Subscribe, listen, and share hundreds of downloadable episodes via our free app or from our libraries at toginet.com, iTunes, Google Play, and other fine podcast platforms. To learn more about Lisa's global consulting services, please visit harvestinghappiness.com. Spread more joy by liking us on Facebook at Harvesting Happiness and following Lisa on Twitter at Lisa Kamen. Harvesting Happiness is produced in collaboration with TogiNet Radio, KBUU Radio Malibu.net, and is available on PRX, the Public Radio Exchange.